Consistency, it's the difference between dreams and reality, between good intentions and great results, between starting something and actually finishing it, but we all know it's not easy. You've probably felt the fire of motivation at some point, maybe after a good podcast or a New Year's resolution. But a few days later it fizzles out, and what's left? Disappointment, guilt, frustration. So how do we force ourselves to stay consistent, even when we don't feel like it, even when the results aren't immediate, even when no one's watching? Let's break it down into 5 powerful points. Every action we take is driven by a reason. But most people focus too much on what they do or how they do it, rarely stopping to understand the deeper purpose behind it. That's the biggest mistake when it comes to building consistency. It's not about motivation. It's not about discipline, it's about clarity. When you understand why something matters to you at a visceral level, consistency becomes natural. You don't need to be pushed or reminded. You're pulled forward by something greater. It's the difference between waking up early because your alarm says so, and waking up early because you're building a life that matters. Let's say you're trying to eat healthy. If your reason is surface level, like fitting into an outfit or copying what someone on social media is doing, you'll fall off the wagon the moment it gets hard. But if your reason is tied to something deeper, like being around to watch your children grow up or reversing a family history of disease, then you have a foundation that can weather any excuse. When people lack consistency, it's not usually because they're lazy. It's because their actions aren't connected to anything meaningful. There's no emotional gravity behind their behavior. And when your actions have no emotional weight, the first sign of resistance will knock you off track. Everything changes when your actions serve something you believe in. That belief is what creates resilience. It's what allows you to keep showing up, even when results are invisible and progress is slow. You're no longer working for an outcome, you're working for a cause. This is how movements begin, this is how leaders inspire, and this is how ordinary people become unstoppable, not by forcing consistency, but by aligning their actions with their values. The deeper your reason, the stronger your resolve, and once your reason becomes clear, consistency is no longer a grind. It becomes an extension of who you are. You stop asking, "How do I stay consistent?" and start living in a way that makes inconsistency feel unnatural. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. We often talk about routines as if they're enough. Wake up, drink water, exercise, read, repeat. But routines are only skin deep. They are a list of actions. What actually creates transformation, what anchors behavior through hard days and long seasons, is something deeper. It's not just a routine, it's a ritual. A ritual is personal, it's emotional, it carries meaning. A routine tells you what to do. A ritual reminds you who you are. When you treat an activity like a task, it can become dull. You go through the motions, but when you assign it meaning, when you tie it to your identity, it becomes sacred. It becomes a moment of alignment between your values and your behavior. Take journaling, for example. As a routine, it might just be a 5-minute task before bed. But as a ritual, it becomes a chance to reflect on growth, to reconnect with your intentions, to learn from the day and give yourself peace. The action doesn't change, but the why behind it does, and that makes all the difference. The same goes for exercise, for writing, for waking up early. When you start saying, "This is just what I do," you're holding yourself accountable to a standard. But when you say, "This is who I am," you're holding yourself accountable to your identity. That's far more powerful, because when behavior is tied to identity, consistency becomes a matter of integrity, not motivation. People who live with consistency aren't superhuman, they've just defined themselves clearly. And they live in alignment with that definition. A violinist doesn't practice daily because it's on a checklist. They do it because their art is an extension of their soul. A leader doesn't show up early because it's trendy. They do it because responsibility to others is part of who they are. That is the power of ritual. Rituals elevate the ordinary. They breathe life into repetition. And when we attach meaning to what we do daily, it's no longer a grind. It's a reflection of purpose. That's how consistency moves from effort to instinct, not because we're perfect, but because we're living out the values we've chosen to embody. There's a reason so many people quit. It's not because they lack talent, and it's rarely because they're not trying hard enough. It's because they don't see results fast enough, and when the progress feels invisible, the effort feels pointless. But here's the truth. Most of what leads to real change happens beneath the surface, long before the results ever show. The world has trained us to chase outcomes. We post before and after pictures, we celebrate milestones, we obsess over goals. But in doing so, we miss what actually builds momentum, consistency in the quiet, repetitive, unseen moments. The key isn't perfection, it's progress, but not the kind of progress you can always measure on a scale or in a bank account. Sometimes, progress is simply showing up, doing the work even when it feels like nothing's changing. Keeping the promise to yourself one more day. Tracking your actions, not your results, shifts the focus from outcome to effort, and that's where growth really lives. Something powerful happens when you create visible proof of your commitment. A notebook with 30 days of check marks, a calendar with a streak you refuse to break, a habit tracker that reminds you you're still in the game. These are more than tools, they're symbols of integrity. They say, I did what I said I'd do, and that builds trust in yourself. You see, when people give up, it's not just the goal they walk away from, it's the belief that their actions matter. That belief erodes quietly when we don't acknowledge progress. So we must remind ourselves every day that the act of doing is already a win. Success doesn't shout, it whispers, and if we're not paying attention, we'll miss it. So don't aim to be flawless, aim to be faithful. Don't count the number of perfect days, count the number of days you showed up even when it wasn't perfect. Because those are the days that separate the ones who reach the finish line from the ones who never get past the start. Not because they were the strongest, but because they tracked their journey, trusted the process, and learned to fall in love with steady, quiet progress. There's a hidden truth behind every great achievement that no one likes to talk about. Consistency is boring. Not always, but often. It's doing the same reps in the gym, even when you don't feel stronger. It's writing every morning, even when the words don't flow. It's reading the same pages, building the same habits, asking the same questions. And yet, that boredom is where excellence is born. We live in a culture addicted to excitement, new ideas, new challenges, new apps, new routines, but mastery doesn't come from novelty, it comes from repetition. The best don't rise because they're constantly stimulated. They rise because they've learned to show up even when it's not exciting anymore. That's the part most people avoid. The stretch of time where results are invisible, emotions are flat, and the process feels uninspiring. But that's exactly where growth hides. That's where grit is formed. That's where your character is tested. When you push through the dullness and stay committed, you don't just get better at the task. You get better at being the kind of person who doesn't quit. The difference between amateurs and professionals isn't talent, it's how they treat the boring parts. Amateurs resist boredom. They think, if I'm not inspired, I can't perform. Professionals, they embrace it. They understand that boredom isn't a signal to stop, it's a signal that you're on the right track. Consistency asks something bigger than enthusiasm. It asks for devotion. It asks for humility. It asks, can you keep showing up when no one is watching and nothing is changing? And when you can say yes to that day after day, you become something very few people are, dependable. This isn't about grinding mindlessly. It's about being emotionally mature enough to recognize that the repetition you dread is the foundation of the life you want. Every boring rep, every unremarkable day, every task that feels mundane, it's all part of a larger story you're building. Because when the spotlight finally comes, when the breakthrough moment arrives, it's not the flash of brilliance that gets you there. It's the hundreds of quiet, boring, unseen moments that no one applauded, but you did anyway. We like to think that willpower is the answer, that if we just try harder, dig deeper, get more motivated, we'll finally stick to the plan. But willpower is like a battery, it drains with use. Some days it's strong, other days it's gone before breakfast, and if we build our habits around something that unreliable, we set ourselves up to fail. What actually drives consistent behavior over time isn't force, it's design. The most consistent people don't rely on motivation to show up, they rely on systems. Their environment is crafted to support the behaviors they want to maintain. Their routines are structured in a way that reduces friction. They don't make 100 decisions a day. They make one good decision, then build their life around it. Imagine someone trying to eat healthy but keeping junk food in the kitchen. Every time they pass by, they're forced to make a choice. Every snack becomes a test of willpower. But move that temptation out of the house and suddenly the behavior becomes easier. The choice doesn't disappear, it just stops being a battle. That's the power of systems. They remove decision fatigue. They build momentum. They create an ecosystem where the default choice is the right one. The same goes for time. If you don't schedule your priorities, your day will fill with distractions. But block off your most important tasks. Prepare your tools the night before. Eliminate unnecessary steps. And you'll discover that consistency feels far less like discipline and far more like flow. Another powerful system. People, you become like the people you spend time with. If you're surrounded by those who chase growth, keep promises, and follow through, so will you. You'll begin to adopt their pace, their standards, their habits. Not because you're trying to fit in, but because you're wired to reflect the behavior of those around you. You don't rise to the level of your dreams, you fall to the level of your systems, and when you design your life intentionally, consistency stops being a struggle. It becomes your new normal, not because you're superhuman, but because you've built a structure that makes doing the right thing the easy thing. Consistency isn't a talent, it's not a gift reserved for the few who are naturally disciplined or endlessly motivated. It's a choice, a deliberate daily decision to align your actions with your values, and it's a skill. Something you build, not something you're born with. When you begin with clarity, when you understand why your actions matter, you create a foundation that doesn't crack under pressure. When you transform routines into rituals, you breathe meaning into the mundane. When you stop obsessing over perfect outcomes and start celebrating progress, you stay connected to the process. When you learn to sit with the boredom instead of running from it, you step into the same rhythm that champions leave by. And when you build systems that carry you when your energy can't, you eliminate the need for willpower altogether. The people we admire most, the ones who lead, who create, who build, who finish, are not those who always felt like it. They are the ones who kept showing up even when they didn't. They didn't force themselves to be consistent by beating themselves up. They became consistent by designing a life around what matters most and refusing to negotiate with their principles. In the end, consistency is less about pushing harder and more about choosing better. It's not about never missing a day, it's about always coming back, because consistency isn't the path to greatness. It is greatness, not loud, not flashy, just quiet, steady effort in service of something bigger than yourself. And that is what makes it powerful.